Before beginning this lesson, you should have located and contacted at least 10 lenders. Asked each lender questions in an effort to find out how creative they can be as a lender and how good they would be to work with. Chosen at least 2 lenders who can provide the service and financing that you need. Pulled and reviewed your credit report and score. When you finish this lesson, you will be able to identify the key components in a real estate purchase contract, define an addendum, identify some common contractual clauses, and present a well-constructed offer to a seller. Tip for success. The tip for success in this guide comes from Todd Duncan's book, Removing the Barriers to Big Dreams. In his book, Mr. Duncan says that every great accomplishment begins with a seed of belief. He cites the example of Andrés Segovia. Andrés grew up in southern Spain and began playing the guitar at a young age. He was always taught that a guitar was simply a folk instrument, but Andrés believed it could be more. He believed he could take the classical compositions of Bach and other masters and play them on his guitar, and before long he was doing it. Then he began studying the techniques of other instruments such as the cello and violin and subsequently adapted his own techniques on the guitar. He played classical pieces and composed his own songs. He essentially invented the style we recognize as classical guitar. As a result of Andrés Segovia's belief that he could use the guitar to transcend the existing musical theories, the guitar has become a staple in the world of classical music and is currently one of the most popular types of music that young musicians aspire to learn. His example shows that belief in one's ideas and abilities can be the starting point to achieving big dreams. The 3 most common and most significant barriers to dreaming big dreams are fear, lack of knowledge, negative associations. Fear. Vincent van Gogh said, "The fishermen know that the sea is dangerous and the storm terrible, but they have never found these dangers sufficient reason for remaining ashore." Is there a particular fear that is keeping you from venturing out on the big sea of possibility? Fear of failure? Fear of success? Fear of inadequacy? Whatever the case may be, before you consider not following your dream, ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen by trying to achieve my dream? If the best that could happen outweighs the worst that could happen, move forward with confidence. Lack of knowledge. The second common barrier is lack of knowledge. Even though you may not know all the details of something, that is no reason to keep from dreaming and performing big. History is full of great discoveries that came as a result of an adventurous, yet somewhat ignorant soul venturing into the unknown with a dream to make a difference and doing it. If you're using lack of knowledge as an excuse for not pursuing your dreams, ask yourself, what is the least I need to know in order to go for it? Seek to gain that knowledge, and then move forward. One of the purposes of these lessons is to provide you with the knowledge you need to pursue your dreams of financial freedom. Negative associations. There are plenty of people in the world who are more than happy to tell you that you can't do something. Much of their lack of faith comes from their own fears and insecurities. You should associate with those who are supportive and provide encouragement. Going for a dream is hard enough without naysayers always trying to drag you down. So ask yourself, do I spend more time with dream makers or dream breakers? Is one of these 3 barriers keeping you from going after what you truly long for? If you believe in yourself and address your personal dream barriers, there is no reason why you cannot achieve all your dreams and more. So let's continue preparing to achieve those dreams. Fast Offer Formula Review. This guide discusses purchase contracts, also known as offer contracts, and how to best use them. Before you put information into a contract, you need to calculate your offer amount and determine the potential profit. You will encounter many different calculations and formulas in the investing business. Different investment strategies dictate different formulas to evaluate the deal and determine potential profitability. For example, the fast cash investment strategy typically uses the fast offer formula. This offer formula can also be used to calculate a rough estimate of value for buy and hold and cash flow properties. The goal is to arrive at a maximum offer amount that will ensure a decent profit. Here's how it works. The first step is to calculate the fair market value for your property. Let's say the fair market value of your prospective property is $250,000. Subtract the estimated costs of repairs from that amount, say $11,000, and then the closing and holding costs, including any payments you may need to make to pay for utilities and insurance for 90 days. Let's assume that is $9,000. You also want to subtract the real estate agent's commission. This allows you to offer to pay the commission when negotiating to get the seller to accept your price. Lastly, subtract the most important number, your profit. As you recall, your profit should be at least $10,000. Who draws up the contract? Your offer will be part of an offer contract that could be called by several different names. It could be called a purchase contract, purchase and sales agreement, offer to purchase, letter of intent that outlines agreement terms and conditions. One of the first questions about these contracts is whose job is it to draw it up, anyway? You can either have a real estate agent draw it up, or you can do it yourself. In the beginning of your investing career, you may not feel comfortable working with contracts. You may also already have an agent helping you find properties. If you do, then it is part of the agent's job to draw up the contract and present it for you. You would simply run the numbers for your purchase price and consult with the agent on the details of the contract. We will discuss some of the things you need to know about contract details later in this lesson. As you continue to buy and sell properties and assist with contracts, you will become more and more comfortable doing it all on your own. At that point, you can draw up your own contracts and present them to the seller. One of the goals of this lesson is to help you feel more comfortable working with contracts. Which contract to use? As you get more experience with purchase contracts, you will find that many different versions are available when buying a property. Some investors have ones they prefer. Most states have ones they recommend, and you can even buy generic ones from office supply stores or from the internet. The key is that you know for certain that the form you are using is recognized as legally binding by the state in which the property is located. If you plan to use a contract other than the one the agent recommends, it is in your best interest to get it reviewed and approved by a qualified real estate attorney in the state in which the property is located. Most states have a state-approved form available for download on their respective website. Sections of a contract. Most purchase contracts, whether they are 1 page or 10 pages long, consist of 3 parts. Since the contracts you will see differ in terminology, this guide identifies the sections as simply the beginning, the boilerplate, and the signatures. Let's look at each of these sections in detail. The beginning. On multi-page contracts, the beginning consists of the first page or 2. If your contract is just 1 page, the beginning is the top paragraph or 2. This beginning section identifies or describes the buyer and seller, property, financing, amount of earnest money, date of the closing or settlement date, personal property that will be included or specifically excluded from the sale. We will discuss each of these specific items a bit later in the lesson. The boilerplate. The second section of a contract is the boilerplate. This section contains most of the legal jargon, including the clauses that contain both the remedies and penalties for actions or non-action. This means that if there is a breach of contract by one of the involved parties, the remedy is already contained in the contract, so you should not have to seek legal action. Since laws vary from state to state, the contents of the boilerplate also change from state to state. Read over your contract and make sure you have at least a cursory knowledge of the clauses it contains. If you need clarification of any of the clauses, by all means, contact an attorney. Signatures. The last section of a contract is also the most important. It contains the signatures. Without signatures, the contract cannot be enforced and is not considered legally binding. Most states require that all interested parties sign the contract. This means that if there are 2 or more people on the title as sellers, then both need to sign in order to sell the property. If more than one person is listed on the title as the buyer or owner, then each needs to sign the contract. Elements of a contract. Now let's look at some of the specific elements in a contract and how you may want to fill them out for your purchase. These elements are not presented in any particular order. And/or assigns. The first element to look at is the parties involved. These are the buyer and the seller. As an investor, whenever you buy a property from a private seller, write the phrase, "and/or assigns," after your name. This reserves your right to assign the property to another investor in the event you have trouble getting financing, or if some other issue comes up that prevents you from purchasing the property yourself. You can use this clause when you are buying from a private seller, that is, a traditional homeowner. Bank-owned and HUD properties, however, typically reject this clause because they only work directly with buyers and with not third parties. We will discuss other ways to assign a contract with a lender or seller in the assignment of contract lesson of the financing module. Property description. The second element to consider is the property description. Almost all contracts ask for the legal description as well as the address of the property. Generally, you do not have to worry about the legal description. The title company provides that for you. But you do want to make sure the correct property address is listed, complete with the city, state, and zip code. Personal property. Personal property is a very important element of the contract. This addresses anything that is not permanently affixed to the property. Typically, this includes items such as washers and dryers, refrigerators, dishwashers, ovens and ranges, microwaves, window coverings, and the like. If there is ever any question as to whether something is permanently affixed to the property, make sure to include it here just to be safe. Also, do not assume that just because something was listed in the inclusions section of a real estate listing, that it is included in the sale. A good rule to follow is if it can be replaced without performing construction on the property, and you want it, you should include it here. Purchase price. The purchase price is simply the full amount you are offering the seller to buy the property. In the financing section, you describe the ways you will get money to pay the purchase price to the extent that you know them at this time. For example, on a $200,000 purchase, you might list $5,000 as a down payment, a $150,000 FHA loan, and ask for $45,000 in a seller-financed second mortgage. Add those numbers together and they total the $200,000 purchase price. When you get to the point of making an offer, you should have already identified your investment strategy for holding and disposing of the property because this will affect the way you elect to finance it. Earnest money. Another important element in the contract is the earnest money deposit. In some areas they call it consideration money. The contract should specify how much money you are initially putting up to secure the contract. An earnest money deposit says to the seller, "I am serious enough about buying your house that I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is." The minimum legal amount of earnest money varies depending on the state in which the property is located and the seller. In addition, the amount you offer should reflect the demand for the property. If demand is high, you may need to put up to 3% of the purchase price. If there is little demand on the property, you may only need to put up 1% of the purchase price in earnest money. It is not uncommon to offer $500 to $1,000 in earnest money, however, that does not mean that the seller will accept that amount. Acceptance date. Having an acceptance date and time in the contract is an important element for you as a buyer because you don't want the seller to be able to sit on your offer for weeks waiting for a better one to come along. Whenever possible, you should ask to have the contract accepted or countered within 24 hours. Some property types need a longer time period for the sellers to decide if they want to accept. For example, bank-owned properties need to go through an approval process, so they may need as much as 3 or 4 weeks. HUD properties typically need 48 to 72 hours to accept or counter. The listing agent for the property, who represents the seller, can guide you in an appropriate time frame for these types of deals. If you underestimate this time frame, it could disqualify your offer right from the start. Title insurance. The one rule of thumb to follow regarding title insurance is that you should always get it. Title insurance makes sure that the title to the property is clear and that you have legal right to take full ownership. You can choose to pay for the insurance yourself, or you can ask the seller to pay it. Either way, make sure you have it. You might even have to pay for the lender's title insurance to get your new loan, so make sure you are not overextending yourself. Ask your lender if you will need to buy their title insurance. Closing date. You also have the right to specify a closing date. Typically, if you are getting a conventional loan for a property, you should make the closing date 30 to 45 days from when you make the offer. If you are using another kind of financing, make sure to check with the money provider to determine how long they need before the closing and state that on the contract. And remember, you must know your seller as well. They may reject your offer because of your designated time to close. It might be too soon, or too late, in their eyes. Since the closing date is just an estimate at this point, the contract should specify whether it can be renewed. If this is not stated clearly, the contract may end up null and void if the closing does not occur by the specified date. Closing costs. Many times the closing costs are split 50-50 between buyer and seller, however, who pays what is always open to negotiation. Some motivated sellers will pay all the closing costs just to help close the deal. You can specify how much you want the seller to pay in this section. It can always be modified in a later general addendum or counter-offer addendum. Property insurance and tax proration. You always want to make sure the taxes and insurance are prorated from the day of the closing. That way you only have to pay for the specific time you own the property. Many times this is a standard practice, but you always want to make sure. The addendum. Closing versus possession date. The date on which you will take possession of the property needs to be specified on the contract. Possession and closing are similar, but they are not the same thing. Even though you become the owner of record at closing, you may not be able to take possession immediately. The sellers may need a couple of days to move their belongings out and turn over the keys. If you are not taking possession of the property at closing, you should ask that $5,000 of the seller's proceeds be held in escrow until they have actually moved and you have had a chance to assess the property for any damages. If there are no damages, you can release the funds, but if there are, you want to make sure the damages are documented and covered by the seller. All the elements discussed in this section are part of most purchase contracts. However, keep in mind that the contract itself is just a vehicle to get the purchase process started. It can be changed to fit your needs. In fact, anything added to the contract, either by hand or type, typically supersedes the original printed contract. It just needs to have initials and a date next to it to be valid and binding. An addendum can be attached to any contract and is used to modify the original contract, and there is not room to add additional clauses. It also identifies agreements made after the contract was initially drawn up. In fact, it is not uncommon to see a contract with certain lines crossed out and a note next to the line that says, "See addendum." The addendum can have as many additional clauses as necessary to make the contract agreeable to both parties, and it doesn't need to be anything fancy. It can simply be a sheet of paper with clauses hand-written on it, or it can be a specific form, as in state-approved contracts. You can add clauses in the addendum that specify essentially anything that is not illegal. Common clauses. Now let's look at some of the more likely clauses you might consider putting in an addendum when buying a property. Common clause number 1. This offer is subject to buyer's walk-through inspection, and/or buyer's partner's walk-through inspection, and acceptance of same delivered to seller within 30 days of seller's acceptance of this offer to purchase. You do not have to include a partner with this clause, but it is a good idea simply to reserve the right to show it to another investor for whom you are bird dogging, or for joint venture purchases. Also, the timeline for responding with your walk-through acceptance does not have to be 30 days. You can reduce that as much as you wish, however, you should not extend it beyond 30 days. A good ballpark amount of time period is about 2 weeks. Too much of an extension might make the seller question your desire or ability to purchase. This clause is a great one to include because it gives you a way to get out of a deal if you discover something about the property or the purchase that you didn't know when you submitted the offer. Common clause number 2. This offer is subject to a property inspection by a licensed home inspector, the results of which must meet buyer's satisfaction. This clause is similar to the first, but you specify that the property can be inspected by a property inspector of the buyer's choice. This ensures that if there is anything you or your partner missed in your initial inspection, it will be made known here. If there are too many problems, then you are under no obligation to buy the property. In some cases, you might even place a dollar amount that the repairs cannot exceed. Common clause number 3. Buyer has the right to assign his interest in this contract prior to settlement to any person, corporation, or entity which he may designate. This clause goes hand in hand with the point made earlier in this lesson about putting and/or assigns after your name when you sign the contract. You should do both when working with private sellers just to cover your bases. Common clause number 4. This offer is subject to approval of buyer's associate within 30 days of acceptance. This clause is especially useful when you are working with a money partner or joint venture party who needs to approve a property purchase. As with the walk-through acceptance clause, you can shorten the time period to whatever you like, but it is generally not necessary to allow for 30 days. Again, 2 weeks would be about right. This is another great clause to use to exit a deal that has turned bad without violating the terms of the contract. Common clause number 5. Buyer reserves the right to show the property prior to settlement for the purpose of either renting or reselling it, and seller agrees to permit access to buyer at any time from the date of this agreement up to the settlement date. You need this kind of flexibility from the seller if you are planning on renting or quickly reselling the property. It allows you to begin marketing the property before you even have legal possession of it. This can cut down on your holding costs as you may never have to make a mortgage payment on it. The seller may balk at this clause or request a 24-hour written notification of need to show. Common clause number 6. This sale shall include all appliances and fixtures. As we discussed earlier, anything permanently affixed to the property is automatically included in the sale, but if there is ever any question about appliances or fixtures, make sure and include them in the personal property section, here in the addendum, or both. Nuisance clauses. While the addendum can be a powerful tool to make sure the purchase is as beneficial to you as possible, there are some clauses that you can include that actually work against you. They could be perceived by the seller as being a nuisance or ridiculous requests. These kinds of clauses are popularly termed nuisance clauses, and you should not use them. Nuisance clause number 1. Seller guarantees all appliances for 90 days from settlement date. There are a couple of issues with this clause. The first is, how can any seller guarantee that a machine will continue working for any period of time? How many of us have had perfectly good machines break out of nowhere and for seemingly no reason? And how likely is it that you can enforce this after you close on the property anyway? The second issue is that if an appliance is not good for at least 90 more days, just get rid of it. Nothing requires you to have the property furnished either for a buyer or renter. Nuisance clause number 2. Seller shall provide the exact legal description of the property to the buyer within 3 days of acceptance. As discussed earlier, the title company is the one who will be identifying all the legal boundaries and such. There is no reason to make the seller do it. If by chance you have questions about property lines or something similar, go to the county offices and get the specific information from them or hire a surveyor. Nuisance clause number 3. This offer is contingent upon seller delivering keys for the property to buyer at closing. Again, there are a couple of glaring problems with this clause. The first is, unless something goes terribly wrong, you as buyer do not want to cancel the contract at closing. You have incurred fees in preparation for this closing. You have gone through all the trouble of financing, you may have had your credit pulled, you have expectations of making money, or you may even have someone else waiting in the wings to buy or rent the property when it closes. So an issue with keys is a very minor one for you to risk canceling the contract. In some cases, they cannot offer you possession due delays by your lender or the title company in providing the funding or recording the documents. Also, anytime you buy a property you should rekey it anyway to prevent unauthorized persons from getting access. Nuisance clause number 4. The property shall be in move-in condition. The problem with this clause is that many times you are going to be buying a property that needs some repairs and comes in as-is condition. It would be contradictory to have the seller get the property ready to move in. The seller wants to get rid of it as is, so the clause does not serve a legitimate purpose because our business is buying distressed properties as is. Also, what one person might consider ready to move into, another person might consider as too dirty and messy. It is simply too subjective. So while some people may advocate these clauses, they do not really benefit you and should be avoided. In some cases, they could actually hinder your offer from being accepted by sellers. If you appear to ask for too much or for unrealistic things in your clauses, sellers may be skeptical of you and your offer. Presenting the offer. Presenting a well-prepared offer, and presenting it well, is critical to being successful in real estate. A lot of elements go into a well-prepared offer, and it would be a shame if everything went well except your presentation and that made the seller decide not to work with you. Before presenting the offer, you should go through a checklist of steps to take to help ensure success. The first thing you should do prior to presenting your offer is to call and make an appointment with the seller or seller's agent. Ideally, you would like this to take place at the seller's home, but if it needs to be at their office or the agent's office, that is fine as well. Presenting the offer in person gives you a much better opportunity to read the seller and explain your offer accordingly. This means your offer has a better chance of being accepted. If you are extremely uncomfortable presenting offers in person, you can fax or email them, but you will be more successful by presenting in person. When you meet, make sure all responsible sellers are present so that you can present to everyone at once. This helps reduce misunderstandings and delays in getting the offer accepted and makes it possible for you to explain and elaborate on your offer as needed for all parties. Begin by taking a few minutes to establish rapport with the sellers. Learn their names and make sure to use them several times during the conversation. People tend to be more accepting if they feel like they have an emotional connection with you. Try to find things you have in common and talk about them. You can get ideas for things they are interested in by looking at pictures on the wall or knickknacks. Present the offer written in a legally sound contract. Verbal offers and acceptances hold no weight and are not legally binding. You need to have everything in writing. After you have taken some time to build rapport with the seller, start talking about the repair list and cost of repairs as you have estimated them. However, don't be overly critical of the property. Doing so will not help you get a lower purchase price. The next step is to begin discussing the terms of the offer, including anything on the addendum. Just before handing the sellers the offer, take a second and talk about the offer price. Remind them that the offer is based on extensive research and evaluation of the risk involved with the property. As you present the offer amount, maintain your confidence in the offer. Keep in mind you have done a lot of work to get to this point and that it really is a fair offer. Additionally, confidence inspires confidence. If the seller feels like the offer you are presenting really is fair and might be the best offer they get, they will be more willing to take it. Confidence does not come naturally to some people, so if you need to, get a friend, spouse, or neighbor to role play with you as you practice going over the offer. A couple of rehearsals should help you feel more comfortable when it comes time to actually present the real offer. Finish your conversation by reminding the sellers of the peace of mind that will come with selling the property. You may want to remind them of the reasons for wanting to sell that they had given in your initial conversation. Thank them for their time and let them know you are looking forward to their reply within 24 hours and to continuing to work with them. If you sound like the deal is already accepted, they may be more inclined to follow your lead. The last thing to keep in mind is that you should always remain professional. Some sellers will be upset with your low price and that is their choice, but do not let it affect you. Stay calm and objective, and even if they reject your offer when you present it, they just might come back to you in the future if they really can't sell, so you should leave your business card with your offer. You can be sure, however, that they will not come back to you if you do not act in a professional manner. Presenting an offer checklist. 1. Call and make an appointment. Presenting in person is more effective. 2. Make sure all sellers are present. 3. Establish rapport with sellers. Learn and use their names. Build on common interests. 4. Present offer in a legally sound contract. Remember, verbal offers are not legally binding. 5. Talk about the repair list and cost estimate, but do not be overly critical of the property. 6. Next, discuss terms of the offer. 7. Practice ahead of time if you need to. Talk about the actual offer price. Remind sellers the offer is based on research. Be confident in the offer. 8. Remind sellers of peace of mind that comes from selling. Remind sellers of the reasons they want or need to sell. 9. After presenting the offer, thank sellers and tell them you look forward to working with them. 10. No matter how the sellers respond, always be professional. Action items. Now that you know about contracts and how to present offers effectively, it is the time to go out and put into practice the things you have learned. So here are the action items for this guide. Of the properties you have evaluated and run numbers for, choose 2 to 4 of them to make offers on. Next, locate and review 3 or 4 possible contracts. Make sure you understand them and get help if you do not. Practice writing a few offers. Present 2 offers this week. Make it a practice to submit at least 2 offers a week from now on. In conclusion, you should recognize that real estate can be frustrating at times, but when it is done correctly, it is very rewarding and very profitable. If you find yourself getting frustrated or not getting offers accepted, go back and review the lessons to make sure you are doing things the way you have been taught. If you are doing what you have learned, there is no reason you will not be successful.